Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we will be going through the life of somebody else in Scripture next week, or starting to. So today, I just wanted to go through just something just one time, and it has to do with the Ten Commandments. And one of the things with the Ten Commandments that I never really thought of at first until I really looked into it is how many of the Ten Commandments are about our relationship with God, and then how many of them are about our relationship with each other as human beings, from a human standpoint. And does that mean then that our human interactions are more important than our relationship with God? Or what does that mean exactly if there's more for the human relationships than there are for the relationship between you and God? Obviously, I don't think that's the case, but it is very interesting to ask that question. So turn to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. First off, Exodus chapter 20 obviously has uh, a lot of law language within it. However, it is still set in a narrative backdrop because most of the book of Exodus is a narrative genre, even though there is law genre within the book of Exodus. So here you have the start of this law genre. A lot of this is going on, but it's all set up within the context of Israel has been set free from Egypt. They are wandering around in the wilderness. They have come to Mount Sinai, and they are on the way to the promised land. Now, clearly, that does not go the way that they planned. It takes a lot longer for them to get into the promised land, sadly, because it's self inflicted, but it takes a little bit longer to get there. So, in the meantime, or at the beginning of this journey towards the promised land, you have the Ten Commandments come up. And so, what does that tell us exactly? Well, it tells us that these laws, these Ten Commandments, are really to help the Israelites as they are journeying, not just in the wilderness, but as they are journeying to set up their country, as they are setting up their over their return to the promised land, and specifically as they try to become more and more the people of God that they are supposed to be. Obviously, it does not really go well, as the rest of the Old Testament shows. There are ups and downs with the Israelites with their relationship with God. However, that kind of reflects the way that we are as believers, to be honest. We very much have that same kind of roller coaster feeling at times, so we can understand how that is. But that's where the Ten Commandments come into play. They really want to help and encourage the Israelites as they are in the wilderness, getting ready to go into the promised land. Here is how not only you are to obey God, but here is how you are to live based on what God tells you, and He gives them 10 commandments. So, with that, let's read chapter 20. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 17. And God spoke all these words, saying, now, first off, right off the bat, it's important to see that yes, the Ten Commandments are written down, but it is very much an audible thing that God says to Moses. It is not just something that Moses comes up with and then he's like, oh, I got it in a dream or something. No, he gets it literally from the voice of God, which makes these words the very words of God, just like Scripture are. But this is literally the audible words of God to Moses. Verse 2. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Just reminding them who he is, what he has done. Verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. And remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So you have in verses 3 through 11, you have the first four commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a carved image, or basically God saying avoid idolatry. And then you have in verse 7, do not take the Lord's name in vain. And then in verse 8 through 11, you have the Sabbath. So the first four have to do with our relationship with God, which is incredibly important, obviously. And it is incredibly useful to see the foundations of not just the Ten Commandments, but our faith is very much on these things. Making sure that our God is the only one who we worship. Absolutely, he is the only one that we worship. Second, that we don't put something in the place of God to worship that is just so far from his majesty and from his glory, but yet that is very easy to do. And we do that all the time. Yes, it may not be a carved image of wood or stone nowadays that we put up as an idol, but those idols absolutely we need to avoid from putting as the center of our heart, as the center of our mind and our desires as well. Taking the Lord's name in vain. Absolutely, we should keep track of how we talk about our God, how we talk about Jesus. And then finally, you have the Sabbath day, which we could get into a whole different thing about just the Sabbath day. But in summary, yes, take time to slow down things in your life. Spend time not just with your family, but spend time with the Lord when you could be doing something else, whether it's a job or whether it's whatever it might be. Take some time to spend with the Lord, and that is the Sabbath day. But then you have the rest of the Ten Commandments 5 through 10. So let's look at those, starting in verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So, in Commandments 5 through 10, you are dealing with human relationships, whether it is between you as a child and your father and your mother, as in verse 12, or with other people, whether it has to deal with murder, has to deal with adultery, has to do with stealing, lying, or being covetous covetous of your neighbor's house, of your neighbor's stuff, of your neighbor's spouse. There are definitely these horizontal relationships, these person to person relationships that are set up. So, here's the big question. If the Ten Commandments spends a majority of the Ten Commandments on the horizontal relationships that we have, or just person to person relationships, does that mean that those relationships are more important than the vertical relationships, which only has 1 to 4? Absolutely not. First off, you have 1 to 4 being started first, and that means a lot in that culture. When you're writing something, you want to have the very most important things, especially when it comes to law genre. You want to have your most important things at the beginning. Not that the other things don't matter, it's just your first things that you have in your law genre set the foundation for everything that comes afterwards, and that is exactly what is going on here. And also, based on your relationship with the Lord, that vertical relationship, everything in Commandments 1 through 4 is then going to help impact and improve your relationship with other people, or Commandments 5 through 10. Whereas if you really are struggling with that vertical relationship, Commandments 1 through 4, don't be surprised if that then impacts and makes it more frequent that you struggle or you deal with problems with Commandments 5 through 10. Obviously, I hope you don't go and start murdering people if you think that you're having a hard time with God recently. But I definitely think this is the case, though, where I think a lot of the times where I find myself dealing with my mind is not focused on Jesus, or when my mind is not focused on Jesus, that's when I have a tendency to lie. That's when I have a tendency to be covetous. That's when I have a tendency to mouth off to to authority, whether it's mother and father, whether it's boss, whatever it might be. That is related to how my relationship is with Jesus, with the vertical aspect to the Lord. So hopefully here, it's not just memorizing the Ten Commandments, which are important, and that'd be a great thing to do, by the way, if you could memorize these. But it's not just about this and looking, okay, here's what I have to do to really, really be on God's good side. No, it's much more than that. It's an encouragement to say, look, if you are really focused on your relationship with Jesus, on your relationship with God, then that will impact in a very positive way your relationship with those around you. Because again, your relationship with God is the foundational aspect. So, yes, the Ten Commandments, 1 through 4 are your vertical relationship with God. Commandments 5 through 10 are your horizontal relationship with others around you. But that doesn't mean then that your horizontal relationship is more important than your vertical relationship with the Lord. Actually, your vertical relationship with the Lord is the foundation for how you respond to and how you impact and how you deal with those around you. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. So hopefully that is something that opens your eyes about the Ten Commandments that you may not have thought about before, just like I had done prior. So with that being said, I will see you next week with the Brahmin Word, but thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today as we took another look at the Ten Commandments. Thanks.